So when we're looking at the news, there's a couple of key considerations we want to look for in a news article. One is the byline, the author or authors of an article. If there's no byline, not even a staff writer, that's probably a red flag for an unreliable source. And then sources of the article should be citing its data from somewhere. Typically, you want to look for the phrase like according to, and then the source, and often these sources should be government entities, political offices, spokespeople, organizations, or eyewitnesses. And then quotes. Well, not always in an article, look for quotes and statements made by sources to corroborate the story that the article is reporting. And context. A good news source is not just going to report the contemporaneous facts, the current facts, but also give context as to why the story is relevant, important, or impactful for the reported event. Now, there's a couple types of news articles. There's breaking news, there's conventional news, there's investigatory news, and there's editorials and op-eds. Now, when it comes to breaking news, this is stuff that's just coming out just to spread information as quickly as possible. For an example, report on a terrorist attack that just happened, or Bernie Sanders just dropping out of the race, for instance. It's useful for getting information out quickly, but a negative is it's often the least reliable in terms of facts and sourcing, as you'll notice, like how people are reporting coronavirus cases during the day. It's usually those numbers aren't finalized until the end of the day or the day after in terms of what happened that day. So, and then a lot of these breaking news stories often lack a larger context because we just don't know yet. And then conventional news, for instance, an example would be a report on the state of the Obamacare repeal vote. Conventional news is a story that's going to have some kind of context, some kind of information that gives a greater narrative. So they're usually more reliable. They're useful in observing the attitudes of the moment, and they're more likely to give some sort of context to the story, but they're not usually as detailed or in-depth as reporting as you would get like in an investigatory piece. Now, investigatory news are deep dives that go into a particular topic with some good detail. Usually they're the most reliable in sourcing and detail, and they give the most in-depth. They're the most in-depth and give the best context. They give the best in the way of context in terms of wrapping around like this either a narrative or what the bigger picture is. But the problem is that they're often long and they're infrequently released. Sometimes it takes 6 months to a year to write some of these longer pieces. So they take time to write and develop. And then editorials and op-eds. These are opinion pieces that are often put together, an argument for some sort of viewpoint or perspective, typically on a given view, on a given debate or issue of the day. They're useful for arguments, particularly when trying to look at a particular debate, but they're not the most reliable in objectivity. It doesn't necessarily mean that these are bad sources, but it just means that, these are different tools. You use these tools in different ways and in different contexts. And if we go down to news outlets, I've changed the PBS NewsHour and NPR Newslink to news outlets. And I've actually provided mainstream news outlets, web-based news outlets, and international news outlets. And the cool thing is, I don't know why the colors are wrong, but if you click on it, it'll actually send you to that site. So it'll give you, that way it's a nice little quick way of doing that. So you can kind of get a taste of what each one of these sites are and how they operate. The way that your hot newspaper is going to work is that you're going to pull from one out of each of these buckets. So when you do your comparing and contrasting of coverage, you're going to do something about the Electoral College from the mainstream news sources, web-based news sources, and international sources. And it's going to be somewhere around approximately around the same time, because those are, you want to think of this as kind of like an experiment, and the controls that you have are the subject matter and the time that it was written. And then your variables are going to be, for instance, CBS, Newsweek, and Reuters. or the LA Times, Slate, and Al Jazeera, or the Washington Post, Mother Jones, and the Japan Times. So you're going to pick one from each one of these, and you'll compare and contrast the news coverage and how similar or different it is. And don't worry, the prompt is going to go very in depth about what is it that you should be looking at. But I want to just kind of get this into your head about how we should be looking at things. So if we were to go ahead and look at, for instance, NBC News, right? We can go through here and we can actually open up to, let's say, Electoral College, right? Republicans and Democrats take opposite views on Nixon, the Electoral College. Interesting, May 6, 2019. So let's take a look at that. A majority overall, 53% said the US should move to a national popular vote. And so there's a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll that finds 50% of Americans support a move to the popular vote. So interesting. So this is based off of a study that was shown up. So you can see that that's going on right here. So this was around May 6, 2019. Now, the cool thing is that you can actually do specific searches through Google that will do that. So if we go to Google News, and then, or you know what, let's just go to Google itself. So we're going to put in Electoral College. Now, here's some interesting stuff. If we click on news, now let's look at some of the settings that some of the tools we have. All news, recent, sorted by relevance, sorted by date. Well, we want to make sure that we can find those specific ones. So we're going to do a custom range, and it was May of last year, right? So let's do May 1st to, let's say May 31st, just for the sake of argument. And now look at what we've got. We've got the New York Times, we've got NPR, we've got The Hill, we've got CBS, we've got Newsweek, we've got Time, NBC News, the Daily Signal. Let's see if somebody, let's say that Vox actually did something that we want to look up. Now here's the trick. So if we want to specifically look at a particular website, all you have to do is, here's a little trick. If you type site : let's see if Vox did anything. So Electoral College site, Vox, this is all of the stuff that mentions the Electoral College in May of 2019, and it's only from Vox.com. So that's really cool, isn't it? Because then that way, you, instead of you having to like dig through a whole bunch of webs and a whole bunch of searches to see if your site pops up again, or let's say that we want to go look at like the New York Times. Here's everything about the New York, everything that was mentioned about the Electoral College within the new, that was mentioned in the New York Times from May 1st to May 31st of 2019. Here, let's take a look at, let's do, so if I want to do something on the assault weapons ban, and let's say, when did the Las Vegas shooting happen? Let's see. Because that was a big one. 2017 Las Vegas shooting. So here's where you can use Wikipedia. if you just need to look up a quick information about like when something happened, Wikipedia is not a source, but it's a start. It will give you a good idea of where to start looking so you're not flying blind. And if you do think that there's something interesting, here's a great thing. All of this is the actual sources that you can go and check out. And what you can do is October 1st, 2017. So let's look at all of these. Let's look at the information all from November of 2017. So let's do November 1st, 2017. And we'll do that to November 30th, 2017. And let's see what we find. So here's everything that is talked about shootings from in November of 2017 from the New York Times. But let's go even further. Let's do NPR. Okay, so there wasn't anything. Oh, by the way, that would be, you double check your URL. It should be npr.org. Massachusetts becomes first state to ban bump stocks after Las Vegas massacre. Let's try. By the way, if you're not quite sure what the URL is to search in here, this is why I've provided that here when you go to news outlets. Because when you click on it, let's say that we want to go to The Guardian, right? It actually will give you the URL. So if we go here, we could go ahead and slip that in, and then you can get rid of US, just The Guardian. And then check that out. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Doesn't that make your life a lot easier?
It certainly does.
And so this is how you can search for news articles in a really efficient way. So what you do is do a general search just to kind of get your feet wet to see what's there. Don't try and look for things that you're not entirely sure are there. Then once you do that, you're able to see like, oh, okay, so this is what's getting talked about. Here's what's getting talked about. You can look at specific dates and times of things that you know about, like the Las Vegas shooting was a big one. So let's see what was talked about during that. And then we can go from there. So then you can start to see like, oh, what things were mentioned, other things that were mentioned. You can start to piece things together and then know like, oh, I should probably, there's a lot of stuff in August. So I should probably look at stuff in August of this year and then just start bunching through sites. I'll get more specific later on, but in terms of the hot newspaper, but it doesn't need to be from, this year. It can be from, this year or, 15 years ago. The whole purpose of the paper is for you to look at a story that was covered around the same time by 3 different news outlets, and the variables, because those are all acting as your control variables, and the independent variables are what was covered, what was found to be more important, what were the headlines like, what was the verbiage used, those types of things. That's what I want you to analyze. You'll notice when I give you the prompts for your papers, for the hot news and the journal article specifically, I'm not really asking you to talk about the subject matter. I really don't care what you think about guns in the hot newspaper. I really don't care what you think about abortion or, the federal use of native lands or DACA or whatever. I really don't care what you think about it or, what your opinion is on the subject matter. I want to know, how was the coverage similar and different? That's it. You need to be as objective as possible in your writing here. The one time that you'll be able to be subjective and give your opinion will be in your presentations, because that would kind of suck if you went through this whole quarter and weren't able to say what you actually think.